on again.
Oh, all right.
Click on the option that you clicked on
Got it.
before, and
I
it's
got a grid of the beach here too.
We're live now.
We are?
Yeah, we're live.
Hi, everyone. You can see we're having a great time here at the Photoshop show.
Oh, no.
And I wanted to welcome everyone to the show. We have a wonderful guest tonight, a return guest, David Biedny. He is the author of the first Photoshop book ever, and so we're very honored to have him here. And he's going to wow us with some Photoshop tricks that I'm sure you have never seen. And we also have a great panel. We have Dave Bell, we have Ron Clifford, my co-host, and Sean Duggan. Sean has been on the show many times as a guest himself. And I'm Jan Kabili. I'm your co-host. So before we get started, I'd love everyone to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing these days and where people can find you online. And let's start off with, how about Erika?
Oh, hi. So I am here in San Diego. I'm a photographer. I do underwater and beach. I've been lately doing the self-portrait challenges here on Google+. They're totally fun. And I've been shooting event photography. So that's what's new with me.
Terrific. Well, we're so glad you're here. And we also have Sean Duggan. Sean, what have you been doing? Something good, I know.
Yes, indeed. Well, I just got back from Iceland, and I went over there to present 2 seminars on Lightroom and Photoshop for the local Reykjavik population. And then after that, went out and did some location scouting for a workshop that's happening in October to photograph Northern Lights and other cool stuff there. Which actually, people can enter a contest and win a seat on, and that is ending like today or tomorrow. The drawing is tomorrow, March 5th.
So I have to ask you, if you were to go over there and you've never been there before, like me, where do you go to photograph?
Well, you know, there's this ring road that's pretty, commonly traveled over there, and of course, certain times of the year, some parts are more inaccessible than others. But common places are just down along the southeast coast, heading towards the east. The Glacier Lagoon is kind of over in the east, and that's like one of the big places to go. And there's just a lot of really cool places along that sort of southeast coast from Reykjavik, and then also up onto a peninsula to the northwest of Reykjavik.
I've seen something where there's monkeys in a hot tub. Is that in Iceland or is that Japan?
No, that's Japan.
Oh.
I think that those are the snow monkeys in Japan.
But they do have great hot natural hot springs, don't they?
Yeah, they're famous for the natural hot springs, and they have this pretty famous spa outside Reykjavik called the Blue Lagoon, where you can go soak in the bluish mineral waters.
And what's a good time of year to go?
Well, I've been in the summer, which is pretty interesting, where you have these super long days. The sun sets at 11:45 and comes up again at 3:30 in the morning. Really beautiful, lots of wildflowers, pleasant weather, cold at times, but overall very pleasant. But then in the winter, this time was also very interesting. Very cold at times, some snow, but it just made the scenery, pop in a different way. So I'd say almost any time is a good time to go. Unless maybe in the darkest times of the year, where it's pretty much dark most of the day. For photographers, unless you're interested in night photography, that wouldn't be too good.
That's right. Well, welcome back. We're glad you're back.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. And who else is down? Dave Bell, what have you been doing these days?
Hi. Well, we finally got enough rain here in the Napa Valley to get the wild mustard growing. So I've been out a little bit trying to capture some of the yellow blanketed vineyards, and so it's nice to finally get some rain here. It's been really, really needed.
Oh, that's right. And I bet it's so beautiful now.
Oh, that's gorgeous. It is.
Great. Ron Clifford, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, I finally got my keys mailed up to me that I had lost on Lake Huron. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the reason we didn't have the show last week is because I was running the show. Jan has she's a real trooper. She's not at the top of her game tonight, but she's looking fantastic. She had some surgery, and so I was running the show, and I actually lost my keys on frozen Lake Huron, and had to have keys Purelator to me in a place that doesn't get overnight Purelator. So I got an extra couple of days out of my holiday, and we got a lot of great pictures, and yeah, so we're back live, and I'm down to one set of keys.
That sounds like a very fishy excuse.
Yeah. One thing, the Great Lakes are nearly as frozen as they've ever been on record. And this week, sadly yesterday, right where we're going on a trip, I'm doing a workshop on Saturday for 3 days, and a group of 6 are going up. Right where we're going yesterday, somebody caught on their camera phone video of 2 snowmobilers, and one of them went through the ice while they were filming.
Wow.
Yeah, and they had to bring in the rescue helicopter, and they got the gentleman out. One guy got back to shore, but he was going back to shore literally on water. Like he was, you know, the way snowmobiles can, they call it puddle jumping. Excuse me, my dog has decided to join us.
Sit on him.
So yeah, it was a bit of a tragic story. He was brought back with severe hypothermia. He did have a flotation suit, but his snowmobile is in between 300 and 400 feet of Georgian Bay water, which is a bit of a lesson, even though it's been in the severe negatives with the currents on Georgian Bay. It's still very dangerous to be out there on a machine.
Well, let me see. I've been having a heck of a week.
Yeah.
I have never, thank God, knock on wood, I never had anybody inside of my body cutting things until this week, and it was really scary, but it turned out fine. It was no big deal. And it's actually very interesting to see what goes on in hospitals, you know. We take it for granted that if anything ever happens to us, they'll just take care of us, but, you know, you get the feeling that they're kind of guessing too, right? So it was all interesting, but I'm okay now. And I'm looking forward to next week when Russell Brown is coming to town with his circus called Adam 14, and that's going to be here in Boulder this year. And it's a great conference, workshop, fun time for everybody who comes. So that's happening, and we're going to have all the big shots are going to be there. Julianne Costin, Brian Hughes, and oh my gosh, Deke McClelland, and so many great people. I wish that some of you were coming. I know Sean has come in the past.
Yeah, it was great last year. I would have liked to come this year, but the stars were not aligned. But I know you'll have a great time. It's an excellent event.
It is really fun. So that's happening, and some other events are coming up for me too. But enough about me. I want to hear about our special guest, David Biedny, who we haven't seen in quite a while. David, what have you been doing for the last 6 months or so?
I'm on the ice planet Hoth, actually, a.k.a. New York. It's been bad here. But doing what I do up at Yale at the drama school, I teach in the design department. Today we were shooting all sorts of green screen plates, and one of my students, Joey, got really inspired by some work I had done on Memoirs of an Invisible Man, I think, and he came in a full-body green bodysuit. So there's some pictures of this on my Facebook. Well, I think I will put up one picture, but I've got him running around, and he's like, well, how do I do the inside of the pants? And I started to explain to him that you have to take your pants, and you have to get a wire rig on them, and then we shoot some sections of it, and then we do some displacement and distortion, and he's looking at me going, you guys did a lot of work on this stuff, didn't you? It was a lot of work. I'm like, yeah, it was a lot of work, no After Effects, and no layers in Photoshop.
Wow.
Because this was a long time ago, and you had to do things with channels. And when you learn how to use Photoshop with channels, you end up really understanding what goes on at a level that layers can't get you to. And that's one of the things I'm going to really talk about tonight at some length is the kind of dark art of blue screen and how it works and why it works. Because these days people will use a plugin to do it, but when you understand what really goes on and some of the deeper interchannel math that happens, it makes you think about images in a different way. And I'm going to show a trick tonight that, kind of like Arthur C. Clarke said, that an advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
I have this one gag I do in blue screen that that people do after all of these years still find kind of magical. And it involves interchannel math, something you just couldn't do in layers. So yeah, we were shooting blue screen today. Always fun.
Oh, that's great. Well, I can't wait to see what you have for us. And, you know, I actually have nothing more. If you want to go ahead and get started, unless, Ron, do you have something?
No, I think we can go right into it today. I know that David's always got a plethora of wonderful information to share, so I don't want to hold him back. And so I think we can just get right started.
Terrific.
Okay.
That's so Canadian. Right started. We'll get right started.
Right start. So let me see. I'll go into my screen share, I guess. And actually, Photoshop is part of what I want to show tonight, but as I kind of hinted, there's another program I really love, and a lot of people don't know about it. It's been around literally forever. And it's one of these things where you're able to use it to do things that you just could never do in Photoshop. You know, people tend to think that Photoshop is sort of the end-all and be-all of bitmapped image processing, but the truth is that there's a bunch of stuff that Photoshop will never do. And some things it's picked up, like natural media tools, which it's gotten pretty good at over the years. And one of the reasons for that is the guy at Adobe responsible for that, a fellow by the name of Jerry Harris, was part of the duo that wrote Pixel Paint many moons ago. And you had to have been there. This is like the late 80s. I'm really dating myself now. The first Mac 2s and like the first real color paint software. One of the two guys responsible for that is at Adobe for now many years, and he's responsible for the whole brushing engine inside of Photoshop. But it turns out that there are tools other than Photoshop, and people know about Corel Painter, which used to be Fractal Painter. But there's this other program that I'll get to, hopefully, if we have some time left. I'll just show a couple of things in it that really make you understand that it's a big imaging universe out there. There's all sorts of great tools. But what we're going to do this evening, let me get into my screen sharing mode. And, okay, that's interesting. Now, we tried that out before, and now I'm only seeing the effects screen and not screen sharing. That's...
Well, remember you hover over the left, and then this.
Oh yes, got it. And there it is. Boom. And hopefully, there we go. Okay, so let me minimize this. And oh, we don't want to show that yet. So let's first talk about Photoshop. And in fact, I'm going to start with something a little esoteric. Something that I'm really fascinated by, and I've been involved with in a couple of different sandboxes, is the issue of image forensics and analysis. And what this involves really is understanding about certain aspects of Photoshop that aren't immediately clear. So one of the things I want to discuss is a color mode that is so incredibly powerful that an old friend of mine, one Dan Margulis, who I'm guessing everybody on this panel has probably heard of.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote a book called. He wrote a book basically devoted entirely to the LAB color space. The Canyon Conundrum, I believe, is the subtitle of it. And I actually ended up writing the intro, the foreword to that book. But Dan discovered all sorts of really interesting power in the LAB color mode, and it's one of these things where people don't typically use it for a lot of things. But it turns out that in Photoshop, when you do a color space conversion between, let's say, RGB and CMYK, the actual transformation of the values occurs in the LAB color mode. Because as it turns out, LAB has a much wider color gamut or ability to represent colors than either RGB or CMYK. And it turns out that this is the foundation, this color mode, of all sorts of interesting advanced functionality that you might not immediately consider to be important or useful. So, for example, this is a label, this is a photograph of a label off of a Fender amplifier. And the person who took this photograph, it's kind of a funky photograph, it was sent to someone, and the idea was to try to figure out what the actual serial number is right here in bluish ink. So you can like squint your eyes, and you can do all sorts of color manipulations, let's say with levels and curves, to try to figure out what numbers are actually there. In fact, you can even start to go through the red, green, and blue channels, and interestingly enough, in red we sort of start to see it. And in fact, in red, in this particular example, you can really start to pick up that actually it's 5152. Which you don't really see in the green channel, you don't see in the blue channel. Part of that is simply due to the fact that RGB color space, when you look at it at this additive color space, in general terms, the red channel tends to contain the greatest concentration of contrast in the image, the greatest spread of contrast. The green channel tends to basically usually contain the greatest amount of actual high-frequency detail in the image, and the blue channel is where all the nasties live. On a scanner, if it generates noise, you're more than likely to find it in the blue channel than anywhere else. On video frame grabs, most of the artifacts and noise introduced by a lack of a good time-based corrector will show up in blue. So in this particular example, you can start to see this in the red channel. And in fact, this particular example, it doesn't look bad in the red channel. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to convert it from RGB to LAB color space, which gives us these three primary color channels. The lightness, which actually, as it turns out, when you're taking a color image and you want to convert it to black and white or grayscale, this is not a bad place to first try doing that, because the lightness channel will end up giving you pretty much most of the detail and a decent spread of contrast. But then you have these two other channels, A and B. And I'm not sure if people can see it on their screen, but when you start to look at A and B in this context, you really start to see that serial number start to pop out. And in fact, I'm going to open up levels. I'm going to do a Command L, open up levels. I'm just going to equalize this for a moment to more properly match the dynamic range of the image to the dynamic range that Photoshop is taking into consideration. And now the serial number really starts to pop out, right? So immediately you get this sense that in LAB color space, what you basically have, and the way to understand this is to look at the color picker and put it into the LAB mode. And what you'll end up seeing is that basically LAB color space is a three-channel color space where you have lightness and chromacity separated. So A and B, basically A is the ratio between cyan and magenta, and B is the ratio between blue and yellow. And this ends up being really kind of interesting for a number of reasons. One example. You want to apply sharpening to an image, right? And this is a really complex topic that we can spend a lot of time on, but overall, people will well, first of all, let's just get a couple of things out of the way. If you're sharpening images and you're using sharpen edges and sharpen more, you're already doing the wrong thing, all right? And you'll notice also, by the way, this is not the absolute most recent version of Photoshop, so I'm not going to even address that issue. I want to make this so that anybody who's using Photoshop can take advantage of this, not just people who have the latest, greatest version. Most of the important stuff in Photoshop has been there for a while now. So we have Smart Sharpen and Unsharp Mask. And like I suspect Sean ended up cutting his teeth on Unsharp Mask. This, for people who use Photoshop for a long time, this was really the primary sharpening tool. But the thing about this is that people tend to run an Unsharp Mask effect, a process, to basically what this does is it increases the contrast along the edges of an image where there is a good amount of brightness differentiation on either side of an edge. In image processing, we tend to refer to this as high-frequency detail, where, for example, in this particular example, we've got all of this noise in this image, and if I bump the amount up of the sharpening, everything gets crazy because my threshold right now is set to 0, which means that what Unsharp Mask is doing is it's taking this overall contrast enhancement and it's applying it to all of the pixels, basically because the threshold is 0 levels, which is, in essence, is the filter saying there doesn't have to be any amount of brightness differentiation between adjacent pixels for this to take effect. So you immediately learn that if you turn up threshold, now it's really trying to not apply that effect to all of the pixels. It's just looking at where there's a real distinctive edge of brightness, like a dark edge against a bright edge. But in applying Unsharp Mask to an image, effectively, people tend to apply it to all of the red, green, and blue channels in an RGB image. But actually, it turns out that when you do that, you end up creating artifacts in the chromacity or color of an image along with the lightness or the detail. And the truth is that where you really want to, and this is actually a bad example, so I'm going to bring up another example of an image to use for this, not this one. I'll bring up this image. Maybe it'll be a little better, a little less noisy. So, like I said before, in RGB, red, green, and blue tend to basically contain certain things that you'll always use, or you'll always take into consideration. The green channel tends to contain the greatest amount of detail in an image. And so, theoretically, if you're sharpening an image and you want to be able to push your sharpen amount a little more to get more sharpening, a sharper image, but not create color artifacts, there has been an advanced conventional theory that you should only apply sharpening to the green channel. But the reality is that if we take the image and convert it into LAB color mode, what we can do is we can choose to target just the lightness channel, apply sharpening to just the lightness channel, and what this in effect does is it allows us to get larger amounts of sharpening without incurring any kind of color aberration. So if I bring up unsharp mask in here, what I'm doing right now is I'm applying unsharp masking specifically to the lightness of an image. And there's a whole history to unsharp masking, the fact that it is a digital simulation of a darkroom process that is sort of long defunct now, as are most darkroom processes. But by doing this lightness effect, this sharpening effect just to lightness, we can really push the amount of sharpening we're getting, and we're not creating any kind of weird color artifacts. And this is something that it's a really minute thing that is best experienced on your own images with your own monitor. What's nice about this is that essentially going from RGB to LAB and back doesn't incur any kind of image degradation. All right, LAB color has, like I said, a wider color gamut, so you don't lose anything going from RGB to LAB and back even multiple times. And like I said, you can get away with a lot more sharpening by just doing it to the lightness channel. But let's say you don't want to convert your images. Here's another instant little Photoshop trick. I'm going to undo this for a moment. I'm going to step back. In fact, let me just go ahead and revert this file to its original state. When you apply a filter, and it amazes me how many people who are longtime Photoshop users don't actually realize this is really kind of a fun little trick. Let's say I go to apply, and I'm applying the unsharp mask right now to all of the RGB images. Now again, when you do this to an image and you're just applying it to an individual channel, at that point, you run the risk of creating color aberrations as well. If you run it to all the channels, you can push your sharpening, but you might start to get some color noise. But what's interesting about this, if I apply this unsharp mask right now to this image, immediately after I apply it, under the Edit menu, there is this Fade Unsharp Mask command. Normally what this does is allows you to create a cross blend between your affected image and the original. But what's really cool about this is we can also choose to apply the unsharp mask effect with a specific blend mode. And all the way down here at the bottom, we have luminosity. So this is a shortcut that doesn't allow you to interactively evaluate your unsharp mask as you're doing it only to the luminosity channel. But once you come up with a formula that seems to work to get sharpness applied only to luminosity, you can actually basically use that unsharp masking, and immediately after you apply it, go to the Edit, go to the Fade command, and choose just luminosity, and it will indeed apply that effect only to the luminosity channel of the image without having gone to LAB color mode, which is really something that ends up being very useful.
So
Now,
can I ask you a question then?
Please.
Well, you said maybe you wouldn't want to convert to LAB color mode. Can you think of a rational reason why someone would not want to do that?
Not really. Well,
So it can't hurt.
if it's a high-res image, there's some time involved in the conversion. It also gets a little more complicated when you have heavily layered images. But for the most part, there is no reason not to do it. And in fact, there are a lot of reasons to convert to LAB color mode. In fact, let me give you a very specific example of that. This is an image of me shot like in another lifetime. It's an old image that was actually shot on film. And a friend of mine actually owned the photo store that did the processing on this. He used to process images for me. So I get this piece of film back. I get the negative. I scan it into my computer, and I'm looking at it. And I don't have the best skin to begin with, but my eye sees some weird stuff going on up my forehead. And I mean, I'm zooming in, and I'm looking. And I don't know if you can see this on your screens, but you see these weird little dots here?
Yes, you can see them.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm like, oh, well, gee, that's interesting. In fact, actually, this image was, here's the RGB version, right? So the RGB version is not immediately obvious, but if I start to go through red, green, and blue, in the blue, they sort of start to pop out.
Yeah.
The blue channel is where most of the negative scanning artifacts end up, but I'm looking at this, and my eye is seeing a pattern, and I'm like, you know, something's going on here. That's interesting. So what I did was I took this image, and I converted it to LAB color mode. And when I do that, oh, it looks okay, except here's my lightness. My lightness is an image where basically none of those dots are there. So I instantly know that I have something I can use. I can use this lightness version where there's almost none of those dots. Then I go to A. I don't really see anything, but when I click over on B, well, let me pop open levels here, and let me just go ahead and quickly do this. You see that?
Yeah.
So I go, what is that? Well, I go to my friend and I say, hey, you've got this machine that drags film through the different tanks of chemistry to develop it, and that machine is a belt. It has a belt that pulls the film along. I said, you know, this looks like a tread on a belt. He's like, oh my God, I haven't cleaned that thing in forever. Like, yeah, well, guess what? It's depositing things on the film. Wow. So it really popped out in the B component of LAB color space. I mean, look at that. It's as obvious as it's going to get. And I could have pushed the blue channel, but I could never isolate it like this. So in this particular case, I just simply took the lightness, blew the light, just basically copied the lightness channel out, put it into an RGB file, and I had to do a little bit of retouching up here, but I had a relatively clean version. Point is that the LAB color space ends up being a very interesting color space to start to analyze images and to get things from them that you really wouldn't get in standard RGB color space. Questions? All right.
Amazing.
So we're just dumbfounded. That's amazing.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to hurt you guys. So the main thing I really want to discuss tonight is a topic that's very near and dear to me. I was doing blue screen shoots all day, or green screen shoots. So what I've got here are original scanned plates from a movie that everybody might recognize, which is Terminator 2, that I did a bunch of work on. And this particular shot actually presented a number of problems that I won't go into right now. It's only in the director's cut of the movie, actually. If you saw the standard theatrical release, this shot wasn't in there. So there's this plot, this subplot, after they all end up in the steel mill at the very end, and after Arnold blows the T-1000 apart, he's got covered in this frozen liquid nitrogen, and Arnold does his hasta la vista, baby, and shoots him, and he blows up, and he shatters into all these metallic pieces on the floor. Well, now he reassembles, but he is inadvertently picking up the textures of things in the factory and not able to control it. And there are a bunch, if you have the director's cut, there's a bunch of scenes, there are a bunch of shots that are in this final sequence that are beautiful shots where he's melting into surfaces, he's walking along this corrugated metal floor, and his boots are getting sucked into the floor and taking on the texture, and he lifts his boots up, and it's like they snap back like they're Jell-O and go back to normal texture. So he's walking along, and he reaches out with his arm, and he grabs this striped yellow-black handrail. And he freezes because his arm melts into the handrail, and if we have a moment when I'm done, I'll show you the actual prop arm from that shot, which I still own. He then pulls his hand up and he looks at it, and his hand has taken on the texture of the arm rail. He then flicks his arm, and it's back to normal. And what I have here is one of the normal blue screen plates. After he does the flick, this is what he's looking at. He's looking at his arm. So this blue screen arm was not Robert Patrick's arm. Belonged to a fellow at ILM by the name of George Joblove, who used to be the head of computer graphics there. And there was another version of this arm that basically was painted yellow and black with stripes on it. We did a digital cross dissolve between the two, and then I had to put this on the background. But I chose this. I want to show this first of all because everybody. I've never met anybody who said T2. That's a terrible movie. It's never happened. People tend to like it, and what this image demonstrates is something that is the bane of every compositor. Really light hair detail. See that? Pulling a mask for that hair is just not trivial. Trying to get that hair isolated from the blue background is a problem. So let's look at how blue screen works. And this involves just a little bit of, not mathematics, but a little bit of data processing, which is kind of an inelegant way of saying pixel pushing that's not like with brushes or anything. Because basically what we want to do is we want to create a mask for this. And if we try to, let's say, use the magic wand to click on the blue, forget about it. It's just not going to happen that way. Blue screen is shot that way. You have things shot against blue and green screen for a very particular set of reasons. And really what they deal with are the interchannel relationships between red, green, and blue. And you can start to tell immediately right off the top by looking at this plate that, as you would expect in an RGB additive color file, the blue channel should be showing us mostly white back here because it's a blue screen. There should be a pure amount of blue in this, which would register in the blue channel as white. That's the presence of the blue color component in the overall image. Then we have the red channel. The red channel, where the blue background is pretty much all dark or black. And I could be basically going along here with the info palette with my real-time densitometer and sort of making sure of that. And sure enough, you know, where this background is, in red, there's in the red channel, there's nothing there. What's kind of interesting about this, and this is one of the things that people immediately get wrong about shooting green screen and blue screen. There's always been this sort of mentality that if you're shooting a blue screen plate, a foreground plate, which is what this is considered, this is the thing that's going to go on a different background. There has always been this sort of conventional wisdom that if you were to sample the blue background, it should be red 0, green 0, and blue 255. That's in an 8-bit per channel color space, which is sort of the standard color space for Photoshop. Even though Photoshop can handle 1632 bits per channel, typically people tend to work in an 8-bit per channel space. So if you look at the green channel here, the green channel is not black the way it would be if this blue were pure blue. Instead, what we've got, and I'm just going to switch my little interactive color educational system here, aka the color picker. I'll switch it back to RGB. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dial everything down to 0. If I bring blue all the way up to 255, I see pure blue. But if I start to add some green to that, all that I really see happening in additive color space is that the blue gets a little lighter. Now, this is a good thing because this medium density gray in the green channel where the blue background is, this is going to be the magic later on that's going to let us solve the biggest problem that one runs into with blue and green screen, which is something called color spill. But before we get to that, what we're going to do is we're going to start to derive a mask for this. And this is the way this works. In order to get a mask, we look at our red channel and we look at our blue channel. These two channels, almost regardless of the actual color of the foreground element, which in this case is the hand and the outfit, These end up complementing each other in a very interesting way that can best be demonstrated by taking the red channel, duplicating it, and then inverting it. Now, again, all I did was take the red channel, made a good duplicate of it, and invert it, which now puts the black background into white, as we kind of expect, because I've inverted the pure black and red. Now it's white. But now look at the darkness densities, let's say, of the hand, right? Where these left edges of the fingers have dark density. If I look at the blue channel and I look at those same areas, those are lighter. Well, this is a clue. And this is part of how blue screen math works. What I want to do is I want to take the red channel, the inverted red channel, I want to take the blue channel, and I want to combine them together using multiply, which is something I talked about last time I was on the show. I used multiply on RGB layers to increase density, dark density. Now I can't do that here because these are not layers, they're channels. And in order to accomplish a blend of these channels, I go to what is, for many people, the scariest aspect of Photoshop, which is apply image. Now, apply image, I'm going to keep it simple tonight because we only have a finite amount of time. But essentially, I have chosen my inverted red channel as my target. So the result of my apply image calculation will end up in this red copy. I target the red copy. It's the currently active channel because when I go to apply image, and this is where the interface of this is definitely a little cryptic. Apply image basically takes into account the currently targeted channel and another channel in the same image, or even another image. I'm going to go ahead and choose the blue channel in this image. And if you look at what's going on here in the background, I'm essentially taking the blue channel and multiplying it with the inverted red. And in effect, what that's doing is it's combining the dark density of the inverted red with the dark density of blue. And this doesn't really look like anything yet. I click on OK, and so now the inverted red is replaced with this. But watch what happens when I take this and I invert it. Now I'm getting closer to a mask for the hand. And indeed, if I zoom in here, you'll see that not only am I getting close to a mask for the hand, but look at the nice little hair detail there. The mask is holding that up. But I've also got a bunch of non-white areas inside of this mask, which is why I will now go to Image, Adjustments, and Curves, perhaps the most important color correction tool in Photoshop. And what I'm going to do now, what I want to do, first of all, is not use the curve spline editor mode. I'm going to go to something that people tend to not use, which actually was the only mode that curves had for the first couple of versions of Photoshop, which is the pencil tool. Otherwise known in Photoshop 1.0, this didn't used to be called curves. This was called arbitrary map, which, by the way, is why still today Command M is how you invoke curves. That refers to the map in arbitrary map, the first name of this. So I'm going to zoom back here a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cursor, bring it out to the screen, and as I click and I sample, I see that all of these light grays are basically in the upper quarter tone area of my curve, my transfer curve. And just a quick reminder, the way curves work, values come in from the bottom and exit stage left. And this transfer curve basically is how the density values are mapped coming in and going out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an effect called clamping. I want all of these light grays to basically be pushed right to white. And you can see what goes on. Basically, I'm now taking all of the densities inside of that mask area that are not pure white, and I'm driving them there. And I'm going a little further than I have to, in essence, because what I'm going to do now is show you that, well, the hair is still there, but now I'm getting a very abrupt drop-off between what is white and what isn't. Which, by the way, we can see in the transfer curve this really abrupt differentiation. It's a fall-off, which is why the smooth command exists in here. That's to reintroduce anti-aliasing into those areas so we don't have an abrupt transfer of values. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on OK. And if I zoom back here, I have a not bad mask for this. Let's see how well it actually works. So I'm just going to go here, hold down my Command key, click on that channel to load as a selection. I haven't garbage matted out any of these areas below or on top. Normally, in a typical blue screen process, we would do something called garbage matting, which would automatically block those areas out and fill them with pure blue in order to be essentially transparent to this whole thing. But it doesn't really matter right now. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to come over to the background plate, and I'm going to do a paste. Now, that's not a bad comp. And in fact, I'm going to zoom in here to the area of the hair, and as you can see, the hair came through, but we also see that there's a bunch of blue spill, which is what happens when we have a very soft detail like this. Blue light is basically blasting through this because these hairs are fine. They're not full opacity. So if you go back to the original Star Wars movies, if you're lucky enough to have the unretouched versions, it's kind of fun when you watch the Millennium Falcon moving quickly. It starts to get this blue line around it, which people think is like the Force. And it's not. It's blue spill. It's basically the detrimental artifacts of doing blue screen compositing. So this is where things get really interesting. Strap yourselves in for this one. I'm going to undo this. I'm going to go back to the blue screen element. Now, I do a Command D to unselect, make sure nothing's selected. Now watch this. I have 3 channels of information here. I have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. As it turns out, my green channel is not pure black, it's not pure white, it's a shade of gray. This is how color spill removal happens under the hood. We are going to take the red and the green channel and we're going to compare them. I'm going to choose the red channel as my target, so it's currently selected, and I'm going to go ahead and invoke image, apply image. So now what I want to do is I want to compare the selected red channel with this green channel, and I want to basically have this image, this channel, be the results of the lighter of these two things. Now, when I do this, where the green channel is this medium density gray in the background, that's obviously lighter than pure black, so lighten now actually takes the black background of the red channel and brings it to the exact same density value as the background in the green channel, which is a medium density gray. Now if I click on OK and I look at the RGB image, it doesn't really look like anything's happened. It's still pretty much a hand with the same color values on a blue background. But now watch this. Here's my blue channel. The blue channel where the blue screen is pure white. I target my blue channel, I go back and reinvoke apply image, and now I compare the targeted blue channel with the green channel, and instead of lightening, I'm going to darken the blue channel where the blue channel was pure white, indicating that this was a pure blue component in the overall RGB image. Now what I'm doing is I'm saying compare that to the gray background of the green channel and fill the background of this blue channel with that same density. Now when I click on OK, look at what I get. I now have a color hand on a neutral density background. The blue is gone. Essentially what I've got is a background where the gray value back here is the same in all 3 channels, and the most basic level of RGB additive color theory is that if I have the same amount of RGB in all 3 channels, then what I have is an achromatic gray. Where this is really interesting is if I take this now, use my same derived mask and copy this hand and come over to the blue screen plate and paste. Uh-oh, what happened? RGB, command, click on that. Copy. All right, I'll do it the old-fashioned way through the menus. Oh, that's weird. Why is it not giving me a paste command now? Uh-oh, hold on. Right, well, RGB is all targeted. I'm through my mask here. I do a copy. It's in the clipboard. Here, let me just revert that. No, it doesn't want to revert that. Hold on. Why is this not working? Where's my paste command? Oh my God, what's going on here?
It only happens when you're live.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Oh.
Are you on your paste layer? Are you on the wrong channels?
No, I have my RGB channels are targeted. So when I load this selection and I do a copy, in fact, I'll prove. Oh no, but look, it's not doing a paste now. What is that about? All right, hold on. You know, I've done this demo many times. It's never done this. You've got to be kidding me. Oh, man, this isn't fair. This is like, it's the final delivery. I can't believe.
We're all holding our breath. We're going blue.
I know. Think about how I feel here. All right, how about if I make a new layer out of that? Will that help? Pretty please, demo gods? Won't you? Won't you? Don't forsake me here. Copy. Come over here. Please work. Yay! Paste. Boom.
That's why.
Here's the hand. Here's the hair. Instead of blue coming through, gray's coming through. But gray has no color. Yeah, right. Woo! There is a perfect hair comp. Now, if this shifts colors, well, you know what? We've got to color correct this to the background anyway. So this has to go through a color command step in order to look good. But I mean, you look up here, you know, look at the fingers. That's a really good composite. And the hair detail is intact. No color spill. This has been doable in Photoshop since version 1.0. And at Industrial Light and Magic, this is how we did blue screen and green screen. We did it all through this interchannel processing. Nowadays, people think that they have to buy like plugins to do this kind of stuff. The underlying math has always been there. Just a trick to know how to find it and use it.
Is this work better than the new? I know in Photoshop 6 they have like the the cut and the outline and then the correct for the edges. Does this work better than the systems that they have, the dummier, the built-in systems they have now?
This is the kind of thing where any technology they have to do this kind of work now, under the hood, is using similar techniques to this. What I've got here is complete control. So remember that basically the way that software tools work, the more accessible the interface, typically you pay for that by giving up some control. I, at this point, to be perfectly frank with you, this is the kind of work that I would probably choose After Effects for. There is a plugin in After Effects called Keylight, which is a compositing tool that Adobe licensed from a company in the UK called The Foundry that uses similar math like this to do what it does. The reason I like to show this is that you start to understand how to do things that, like, let's say just the idea that I was able to take this blue background and convert it to neutral density. The only way to do that is through interchannel math. The moment you start to choose a manual selection or masking tool, you are basically moving away from using the data in the image to using an algorithm that derives data from the image. Directly using the underlying the data itself is always going to give you more control, but you have to understand a little bit more about how the program works. So, granted, This is fairly advanced functionality in Photoshop. But when you learn this, now when you go to shoot blue screen plates or green screen plates, instantly you know that, hey, don't go for the perfect blue, go for a slightly lighter blue, or in the case of a green screen, what we've got is a slightly lighter, more muted green. So by adding a little bit of blue to green, when you shoot green screen, where you're shooting not pure, like this pure lime green, but something a little bit more muted, a little bit brighter, this amount of blue will give you a medium density plate from which your software, if you're using Keylight knows about this math, and if you shoot your green screen plate with this knowledge in mind, Keylight will do a much better job of doing color spill removal. So part of this whole mentality is that you're not doing everything in post, you're shooting things knowing what the tools will do in post to best maximize your input to get the best output.
Very
That's
Do you have to do this
fantastic.
manually for each, 24 frames per second?
That's a good question. We were doing this on Mac 2 FXs, running at 33 megahertz processor speed. With Photoshop 1.0, no layers, what we ended up doing was coming up with this elaborate system using quick keys, Excel, and prayer to make this whole thing work. Literally, I'm not kidding. I mean, it was like a dark art to get quick keys running in a way where you could make sure it didn't, like, time out. And in my very first Photoshop book, the official Adobe Photoshop book, which came out in 1991, we had a chapter on using Photoshop to do animation. And in that, we talked about how to set up an Excel spreadsheet. I think we showed like how to do a twirl command. And this is, again, years before After Effects existed. By setting up a spreadsheet with your increments that you wanted to plug into twirl and setting up a quick key to copy the contents of a cell in Excel and then use the cursor key to go one down, copy that, open up Photoshop, open up the twirl filter, do a paste, process, save, and then part of the same quick key command was drag a list of images, because yes, it was 24 images for every second of video or film. It was scanned film. You would then drag an image from a source folder to a source folder to a target folder on the same volume. It would move it out of the source folder, and then all the files would shuffle up one. Then you would do an open that file. We were basically doing batch processing in Photoshop when nobody was even thinking of doing that. I mean, nowadays it's a much different world, but back then we had to do everything by hand, and we had to figure out innovative ways to automate things. And really, it was a tougher world, but honestly, it made you more creative, and it made you think more about the task of problem solving, which nowadays, what happens, if a button doesn't do it, people get lost. Oh, there's no filter for doing that? There's no... In fact, here, just one other quick thing I want to show here.
Just before you go to the one quick thing, Gary's got a question. If there was a blue tinted watch, would you just mask that out ahead of time before you did that process?
Correct. If there's a blue tinted watch, well, first of all, if it was we were shooting a blue tinted watch, I'd shoot it against green screen. So the color of the foreground element has a lot of influence over what you're going to use, whether it's green screen or blue screen. If you've got a show where everybody's in blue outfits, well, then clearly you're going to use green screen. If you have a show where everybody's wearing wacky green outfits, you're not going to get very far with green screen, a reason to go to blue screen. And the costume designers know that if they're going to be shooting people against a screen for compositing, the ultimate no-no is don't use blue and green in the same costume. Can't do it. Because there is no such thing as red screen. That doesn't exist.
So what were you going to show us, the extra thing?
So this is just a really quick extra thing, and it relates to the fact that when you use Unsharp Mask, or even Smart Sharpen, right, This basically is going to apply the contrast enhancement to an edge that is within the halo generated by the blur command. This radius refers to a blur amount. But one has to really start to understand then how these things interact. But let me show you a little trick, which is something I don't even know if it's even documented anywhere anymore. So I know that in an RGB image, red, green, and blue, the green channel has the most amount of image detail, and I care about that. So I'm going to take the green channel, dupe it, and put it into a new channel. Now what I want to do is I want to make a mask for the edges. I want there to be a mask that really in this image ignores the areas of continuous tone and just creates a mask channel for where there are high frequency edges. So it turns out that filter has always been here, and it's been stuck under stylize its find edges. Now nobody uses this filter. It's a filter that is used to do like really goofy, bad-looking effect stuff that looks terrible. In fact, if I go ahead and I choose it, here's the really annoying thing. In early versions of Photoshop, when I ran this filter, it would give me white lines on a black background. In other words, it would give me this. But at one point, when the Kai's Power Tools plugins came out, they had a plugin in there called Invert Find Edges that generated this, which, as it turns out, is the last thing you ever want to use Find Edges for. You don't want this, you want this. So Adobe goes and changes the behavior of the filter to mimic Kai's Power Tools when Kai's Power Tools was doing the exact wrong thing, which drives me nuts because this is known as a Sobel edge operator. This algorithm is what robotics in assembly lines use to determine where the edges of widgets are to know where to grab them. It doesn't care about the surface of a widget. It cares about where the edges are because that's where the pincers come and grab it. So what I've got now, in effect, is the beginnings of a mask that, as you can tell, where these areas where I've got continuous tone in the image, I don't have a lot of white. And in fact, I'm now going to open up my curves control, and I'm going to use this same clamping process to take all of these kind of dark grays and clamp them all down to black. And so what I'm doing now is I'm creating, in essence, a mask that is just going to give me the edges of things, and I'll smooth that a couple of times. So now I have an edge mask. If I use this edge mask and load it, I go over my RGB, command-click on that edge mask as a selection. Now when I go to do things, for example, like sharpen, now my sharpen command, and actually what I probably want to do is actually hide that so I don't see it. View, extras, hide. It's still selected. So now when I go to do an unsharp mask, now it's only going to apply this exclusively to the edges and not to the areas of continuous tone. So yet again, I can push my sharpening a lot further, and it's only occurring where the actual edges of the image are. It's not occurring anywhere within here, and I can have the threshold turned all the way down. It's not going to make a difference. So this is a way to basically control the threshold, but where you're actually seeing where the effect is being applied. That's the original purpose of Find Edges, was to create edge masks for doing all sorts of things, of which only one operation is Find Edge. It is Unsharp Mask.
Fantastic. Okay, I have a question, and this is about sharpening. It's not about what you showed. I have heard the Photoshop product manager several times say that the best of the sharpening features in Photoshop is the Sharpen tool. Do you know why?
Who said that?
Product manager for Photoshop.
The Sharpen tool as in this Sharpen tool?
Exactly. Not the old one from Photoshop 1.0, but the one in the current version of Photoshop.
All right.
If you don't know, that's cool. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No. I'm just thinking about is the implication there that someone is going to make a huge sharpen brush and just swipe it over the image?
No, I think the implication is if you want to sharpen a small area like an eye, but that the math behind it does the best sharpening, better than the sharpen filters.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't know, let it go. But
I really don't. That's news to me.
Yeah, I think what he mentioned when we did that particular show was that there was a big improvement over CS5 to now on that particular tool, a huge improvement. And before he wouldn't have recommended it. And now
Right. That is entirely possible, but I honestly don't know that. I don't know the
okay. Then another question that you may know, if you don't, that's cool. You know how the marching ants around a selection are so deceptive of what is really selected? Why did Adobe choose to have that as the thing that most people see when a selection is made, when it's not really accurate?
That I have an answer to. And because what marching ants, first of all, marching ants is actually something that has been in the Mac operating system since the very beginning. And that's actually where the term marching ants comes from, is from original Apple's Quick Draw code. So when you, let's say we're just going to make a brand new channel here, and I'll make myself a real simple black to white gradient, right? No, not through, I don't want to have the selection, just on the whole channel. Okay. So if I go and I load this as a selection, I see the marching ants line, right? So where that marching ants line is displaying is at the 50% gray value. And that's the trick to understanding how marching ants works. Where that line is exactly at 50% gray. And the problem is, like, I've got a gradient here, which is fine. It's the math that determines where the marching ants goes has a pretty linear task of figuring out where the 50% gray is. But the problem is, when you have irregular masks, now Photoshop basically has to do some interpolation to figure out how to draw the marching ants in areas that either fall directly below or above 50%. By the way, this also ties into something that I always teach people about Photoshop, which is that when you are in the Image Navigator, and you know the Image Navigator allows you to do all of these really weird magnification levels, but the problem is people use this thinking that this is really accurate, and it's not. Anything that's not a even multiplier or divider, these weird values, Photoshop has to do some fairly elaborate math to figure out how to draw pixels at these weird magnifications. So if you're doing things like sharpening or image retouching and you're working at these odd magnifications, you're playing with fire. Okay, so when I teach Photoshop, I say to people, you know, you want to do 50%? Fine. You want to do 100%? Fine. You know, you go ahead and do those things, but don't use odd multiplication or, you know, odd magnification or reduction values. Photoshop has to do some weird math to figure out how to draw these things, and that's what's happening with the marching ants. The marching ants is something where if you have a complex mask that has lots of variation of density values in an entropic or irregular way, Photoshop's going to do some really heinous processing to figure out how to draw these marching ants, and you really can't count. It's more of a convenience than an accuracy. The only way you really know is by looking at the actual mask channel itself.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense now to me.
Yeah. That's how that works. You know, we forget that these programs are not, you know, like magic. There's actually this code underneath trying to do all these things, and very often the code doesn't do what you think it will do because it's software. The way I see it, quite frankly, knowing the complexity of this code, I'm thrilled when it works at all. And people, I love it when people say Photoshop is really complicated to learn. I'm like, imagine how complicated it is to write the thing.
Yeah, I've thought of that. I thought of the army that must be behind this program.
Well, and especially, and you know, not to sort of wax poetic about the past, but going back to the original Photoshop 1.0, Tom Knoll wrote it by himself. It fit on a floppy disk. It's scary.
Wow.
It's scary. So,
You know, I was going to tell you that we're sort of near the end of the time that we normally have the show, and I know you haven't gotten to any of what you want to show. Is there one more thing that you would show us if you had to choose among all those wonderful things in your bag of tricks?
yeah, because I believe in evangelizing really interesting software. I know this is a Photoshop show, I get it, but really quickly, I have to show one of my favorite tools in the world that, like, no one knows about, and it's so, and I very rarely use this word, it is so awesome. It's something called Studio Artist. This is a piece of software written by a company called Synthetic Software. It's not a plugin for Photoshop. It is something that is so radically powerful and so different than anything anyone's ever used that it will melt your mind. Here's the basic idea.
You mean it'll melt our minds more?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that other stuff? Ah!
Yeah.
This will hurt you. So what we've got here is a program that is designed to look at a bitmapped image and figure out, knowing how our eyes perceive shape and color, it will re-synthesize an image. In fact, this is a low-res image. So what I'm going to do, check this out. I'm going to do a new source in Canvas. Don't save that. I'm going to open up an image here, that same image. Now, this is a low-res file. When I go to open, it tells me the size of the image in pixels, right? It's 522 by 584. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Studio Artist re-synthesize this image at, let's say, 250% of its horizontal and vertical size, which will yield a bitmap of 1305 pixels by 1460. Now, I don't see anything yet. I'm going to zoom back here. And I'm going to have Studio Artist look at this bitmapped image and generate a series of vector-based paths. Now, you don't see those paths here, but those paths can now be used to recreate or re-synthesize the image using an algorithmic paint engine that is so monstrously powerful that all I have time for is just to show a couple of quick presets. So here's a quick color sketched version of this image, and it's basically drawing it. And this is an image that is now 2.5 times the size of the original source. So Studio Artist is basically re-synthesizing and redrawing this. Now, this is a goofy effect, but let's go to something a little more complicated, like a color crosshatch. So what is happening here? Oh, here, let's do this. Auto paint with a quick oil colors. Now, what this is now doing is it's repainting this image using this oil paint preset. But like I said, this was a low-res image, and now what Studio Artist is doing is it's repainting the image at 2.5 times the size of the original, and it's actually doing it while we zoom in. So this is not a filter, it's repainting the image. It's as if it has artificial intelligence, and what I've done with this program, among many other things, is I've been able to take thumbnail-size images and re-synthesize them, not photo accurately, but with an artistic rendition. Now, I know a lot of people have Wacom tablets, and Wacom tablets let you do a lot of really cool things. But I'll tell you what, you haven't lived until you've utilized a particle brush that basically, as you paint, if I hold my paint effect still, it is a particle system. And as I click over the image, it's sampling the color values at each point as it goes over the original source, and it's loading the particle system with that color. So now I'm painting the balloon in using a particle system, which is just sick. And here's a particle system that basically branches, and I'm doing this with a mouse right now, but this will allow you to use a Wacom tablet, and it can track all of the data in a Wacom tablet and use it to modulate its effects. It's craziness.
Well, you have definitely outgeeked us all with this. This is fantastic. Now, what is it? So again, it's Paint Synthesizer. That's what it's called.
It's called Studio Artist.
Studio Artist.
Studio Artist, and it's synthetic.com. SYNTHETIK.
Yeah, we shared that in the. Marjorie shared that for us in the comments too.
Right on. Right on. Excellent. It's the kind of thing that, again, I'm always shocked at how many people have never heard of this. And I'm literally just scratching the tip of the iceberg here. The range of effects this thing can produce goes beyond anything Photoshop will ever do.
Fantastic. Well, does anyone else here have a question or a comment for David?
No, but just great stuff. I really enjoyed the blue screen and green screen discussion.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
I learned a lot. Well, you know, David, I would love to talk to you for hours and hours because you understand the why behind everything that's going on in Photoshop. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. You know, they're like, well, I can't possibly learn Photoshop because I can't memorize it all. That's right, you can't. But if you understand how things are working and why they're working, then you can figure out things you don't know already. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And this is something, I know we live in this time when people want everything to be put into a button or a menu command, but the simple fact of the matter is when you're trying to solve imaging problems, it's very rare that you'll find a series of commands that will automatically give you what you want. I mean, the real magic happens when you figure out how things work. Then you can not only figure out new ways of doing things, but anticipate problems and annihilate them to begin with. I really believe that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to understand the tools because otherwise you're sort of captive of the limitations of the interface. I think there's a better way, and that's what I practice.
Yeah.
Well, you're so good at explaining. Can you come back and join us, by the way, so we can see you? Do you know how to do that?
Okay, sure. So let me...
Speaking of coming back and joining us, that's a question that's popping up now in our comments is, when are you coming back? You're welcome to come back and we can schedule you, any time that you let us know. We're usually a month or two ahead, but we're
whenever you like. Now, how do I turn off my screen share here? The same button?
There.
Not the same button?
You hover over the left and press
the green button, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't work.
Guess what? It's clicking on the green button. It's not working.
Okay, so it's not going to work.
Oh,
there is a chance. There's a behind your window on your desktop. There's a little dialog box that's popped up that you could click.
I'm not seeing it. Oh.
Well, that's okay. We don't have to see you, but we would love to.
Switch back to Photoshop.
Well, you did appear for a second.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, and then you went away again.
What is going on here?
Hover. All right, so listen. So hover over to the left. When you see that green button with the white arrow, click it once, and it should.
Well, yeah, I did, and there's got to be something else here to turn off the screen.
No, this happens to me often after doing a long demo.
Oh, man.
But
no. Well, that's all right. Don't worry.
All right.
Don't worry. I do want to tell people, though, that we have some other amazing guests coming up in the coming shows. In 2 weeks, we have Laura Shue, who is a terrific Lightroom instructor. Are you guys familiar with Laura?
No.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
You're going to love her. She's so clear and just really explains everything so well. And then after that, we have Chris Orwig, who is a lynda.com author and a photographer and a professor, and he's going to be with us. I'm very excited about that. We also have John Paul Caponegro coming up, and we have our very own Sean Duggan coming too, and this is about a month, I believe. So
yeah,
So, David, if you want to be with us again, you're more than welcome. You have such unique insight and knowledge and history with Photoshop that we love hearing from you.
That's very sweet. I love to come hang out with you guys, so count on it.
Thank you. All right, then. Anything else? Anybody else?
No, I think we've all been wowed, and we've got our bi-weekly fix, and I'm going to be going back and watching reruns of this one for some time now.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right
thanks,
then.
guys.
Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for being with us tonight. So long
Thank
from the
you all.
Photoshop Show.
See ya.
Bye.
Good night.